I started my commercial photography career in the year 1974. That time most of the work was done in black and white, and color did not come in for advertising work at all. Then over the years, gradually color film was used when color ads were being released. I started with a 35mm camera, which was Leica and sometimes Nikon, all 35mm, and then gradually over the years I shifted to a medium format, which was Mamiya RB67. That was a 120 roll film. Then later on I switched over from an RB67 to a Hasselblad system, which was also 120 roll film. The Hasselblad system was a square format. 6 centimeters by 6 centimeters was the frame area, whereas the Mamiya gave a slightly bigger size of film area, which was 6 centimeters by 7 centimeters. Then the resolution that we got from a 35mm or a medium format was, in those days, much better. Medium format gave much better results than a 35mm. But then for quality work, even a bigger size of film was being used, which was a 4 by 5. The next bigger size was 5 by 7. And the biggest film format was 8 by 10 sheet film. So I went for various workshops in Switzerland and in Germany, and in couple of these workshops held in Germany by Broncolor, the lighting company, and Sinar, the large format company, we were trained with 8 by 10 film, and those films were really high resolution after scanning. But in India there was no scope for using 8 by 10, because firstly they were not available here, and secondly, even if they are available, processing the film and subsequently scanning them for final advertising use, facilities were not available. So we stuck to 4" by 5" film. So I was using a Sinar camera, using film and using color transparency film as well as negative film for the various advertising campaigns. I still use my Sinar camera. I have 3 of them, and I don't use sheet films, because now the digital output from using either a digital film back or attaching a medium format digital camera body onto the Sinar gives me even better results than we used to get using 4" by 5" film. So I can show you the setup that I use, which is 4 by 5 Sinar with a Fuji medium format back attached, and those results are extremely good, and that back is 100 megapixel, and it's more than adequate for all my commercial work. I can use my old Sinar lenses which were designed for film. At the same time, I am also using large format lenses which were designed for digital. There is a difference. So these digital lenses designed for large format gives me much better results than the lenses used in the Sinar, which were designed for film. So I still use those lenses. So on my Fuji medium format body, I use large format Schneider Rodenstock lenses for all my tabletop work, mainly studio based work, where I need the flexibility and the advantages of a medium format camera like medium format view camera like the Sinar, with which I can control my perspectives and depth of field as required. I can extend my depth of field all the way from the front of the lens to all the way to the back. So, if I am shooting say jewelry and I am not shooting right from the top, but from at an angle, with a conventional fixed lens camera I will not be able to keep everything in focus. But with a view camera, by the use of the tilt, shift and swing functions available in a view camera, I can keep everything in focus. Mainly view camera, other than Sinar there are other brands available. The Linoff used to make view cameras with similar functions, Cambo, Calumet and at least another Toyo, at least another half a dozen, which give you the same functionality of a Sinar, but Sinar had more precision and much better made, but most expensive view camera of all those available those days. These days of course not very many people are making view cameras, because many of these functions which were available only on view camera, digitally they are trying to achieve that, like focus stacking is being used to get everything in focus. It is tedious, it is not as quick as using a view camera, but then if you do not have a view camera, the alternative is to use software to get everything in focus. So, initially there was only 35 millimeter. So, when I was an amateur photographer, my father had a Rolleiflex, which was a 120 roll film camera. So, those days everything was black and white, and then gradually both Rolleiflex and Leica and Nikon, all these cameras existed at the same time, but Rolleiflex cameras and Hasselblad cameras were much more expensive, and but the film size was bigger. So, the advantage was that you got slightly higher resolution, but the disadvantage of a Rolleiflex, there were two basic disadvantages. One was their fixed lens, and 80 millimeter was the lens available, and it was twin lens. So, the viewing lens had one view, and the taking lens, which was below the viewing lens, was from a slightly lower viewpoint. So, what you saw was not exactly what you got. So, that is why Hasselblad came into the scene, and that was a single lens reflex. So, at the time of exposure there was a mirror that went up, and the exposure was made on the film. So, what you were viewing was exactly what you got on the film. The other advantage of Hasselblad system was it had interchangeable lenses, which the Rolleiflex did not have. So, for commercial purpose, that was of more useful than Rolleiflex. Then Japanese cameras came in. Bronica was another brand which was similar to Hasselblad in terms of format, both square 6 centimeters by 6 centimeters, but they also had interchangeable lenses. So, you could use from say 38 millimeters all the way up to I think 360 millimeters telephoto lens. So, for commercial use, Rolleiflex cameras were not much of use, and very few professionals were using Rolleiflex. So, professionals were using Hasselblads, Bronica, and then another brand which was Mamiya came into the scene. They also had SLR, but the film format was slightly bigger. So, with a Hasselblad on a square frame, you were getting 12 exposures per roll of film. With the Mamiya, you are getting 6 by 7 centimeters, and you are getting 10 exposures per roll of film. So, the film was slightly bigger. So, you had a choice between a horizontal format or a vertical format. So, you could place the holder vertically or horizontally. So, this was another advantage. In the case of the square film, very few times one could use a square format for a final advertising requirement. So, we had to crop. So, with a rectangular frame, cropping was much less. And then Fuji also brought out a camera which was a 6 by 8 format, 6 centimeters by 8. So, I never use it, but Fuji those days the results were also pretty good. And then I mentioned that we were started using the view cameras like Sinar. One could shoot film, one could use the Hasselblad film backs, or one could use film adapters. Instead of using sheet film, one could use 6 by 7, 6 by 9, even 6 by 12 film adapters onto these Sinar view cameras. So, you are getting super wide frame like 6 by 12 centimeters, which is almost panoramic. So, a view camera has all these advantages which even the Hasselblad or the Mamiya or the Bronicas could not give you. But the only disadvantage was you could not shoot handheld. Bronica, Hasselblad, you could shoot outdoors handheld, but a Sinar had to be mounted on a tripod because it is basically a bellow type of camera. You had to view through the ground glass, and once you set the frame and exposure, you had to remove the ground glass and place the film holder. So, this was not very practical for shooting models or outdoor situations where you needed the mobility of a handheld camera. So, view cameras were basically studio purpose work or architectural use where the subject was still and the camera could be kept still. So, a lot of people in all over the world, photographers were using a Sinar with a super wide lens for using architectural shots, both for exterior architectural shots as well as interior shots using view camera like Sinar and using 4-inch by 5-inch sheet film. But today's digital backs or medium format camera bodies like Fuji, the quality is at par with those old film cameras. So, nobody uses sheet film anymore because film, after you expose, you had to process the film, you have to, after processing, scan the film, and then after scanning the film, you had to do the color corrections. So, there are a lot of stages involved where things could go wrong. But now with the digital system for commercial use, you are getting straight direct output and you are saving time and having greater control on the output. So, the first few assignments that I got was for black and white, and right from my college days I was developing my own black and white film for my own amateur photography. So, I was doing all the processing on my own. I even made my own film developers. I had a few manuals, I had weighing scales, I had to measure the component depending on the type of developer I wanted. I got the Kodak formulae and I used to make my own film developers. I used to make my own print developers. So, for all my black and white printing, I had a black and white enlarger, but then when color advertising work started coming in, initially it was color negative. So, these color negatives were shot on my 35 millimeter cameras and later on the 120 type cameras, and they were being sent to the laboratories for processing. Different laboratories, there was Bone & Shepherd on S.N. Banerjee Road, and also National Colour Lab on Raja Bashwant Rai Road in South Calcutta, who used to do all my color film processing and printing, both in 35 millimeter format as well as the 120 format, which was either 6x7 on the RB67 SLR film camera or Hasselblad film cameras. But then I found that sometimes the processing was not up to the mark. So I met a few professional photographers, one Mr. Vilas Bende, who was the leading commercial photographer in Bombay, and he told me that he also was facing processing problems, the quality was not up to the mark. So he decided to do his own processing, so he suggested that I start my own processing. So I decided to start my own processing, so I bought a Jobo film developer system where I could develop both 35 millimeter as well as 120 roll film and also sheet film in 4x5 size. And the laboratories in Calcutta, they could process 35 millimeter and 120, but not 4 inch by 5 inch. So I switched over to my own processing, and the results were more reliable, and I had total control over the results. If there was a color cast, because a particular batch of film was different from the previous batch, I could, by tweaking the chemicals, correct the colors. So in the chemistry, I went through the manuals, I found that by modifying certain chemicals in the chemical process, I could change the colors, especially transparency film. Now I must add here that when we are shooting color, the color negatives, from the color negatives prints were made, then the prints had to be worked upon by artists in the studio of the various advertising agencies, and after that those artworks had to be scanned with a process camera, and color separation films were made, from which ultimately color prints were made. It was a long process. But then gradually over the years, advertising photography shifted over to transparency film. So from transparency film, no artworks were required. So you could send the film for processing, and it was sent to the scanning houses for scanning, and after scanning, straight away you could feed that into a computer, and further changes and manipulations were done on the computer, but still you had to depend on the laboratory and the scanning house. So when the digital came in, then the scanning process and the film process was totally bypassed, and what you saw instantly you could see on the monitor at the time of exposure, either behind your camera or attached to a laptop or to a desktop screen. One could really enlarge, go into the details and make sure that every frame was perfect before we went to the next shot. Unlike the film days, when you had to shoot Polaroid films, which were the film size, they are not enlarged, and check your composition, lighting and everything before you shot the final exposures on film, whether it was negatives or transparency. So digital has really made things a lot easier. So I cannot explain how difficult to people who started their careers in digital, they just don't have an idea how difficult shooting on film used to be, because there are so many steps where things could go wrong. Either the film batch could be wrong, the chemicals could be wrong, or the processing mechanism or the person doing the processing, that person could make a mistake. The processing machinery, the color temperature control could go wrong. So, there were chances of errors at every stage before you got the final product, which was either the negative or the transparency film in your hand. So, digital has really made life a lot easier for commercial photographers. My maternal uncle, he returned from Germany after doing a master's course in photography from Cologne. So, I was in school, I was the official school photographer, and I was very fond of photography, but at an amateur level. So, when my uncle was working in his studio in Kolkata, I often sat in the corner of his room and used to study him shooting products basically. He was doing a lot of photography for Clarion advertising, and his client was Bata and a few other products, Rickerton or Coleman, but mainly Bata. So, I enjoyed watching him shoot Bata shoes and different lighting, and he was using thermocol sheets for reflecting the light, which I found quite interesting. And that is the first time I saw that you could create your own soft light sources with various reflectors. Later on, when I decided to go in for commercial photography as a part-time at a professional level, this was while I was working for the gramophone company, and to supplement my income, I started doing some commercial work for Lintas advertising. So, initially I started working with a 35mm camera, which was a Nikon, and Lintas said that for most of their commercial work they needed a bigger format. So, I purchased a Mamiya RB67, which was an SLR using 120 film, and the film format was 6 by 7 centimeters, and the quality in terms of detail was much better than what the 35mm camera could give. Even if it was Leica using the best German lenses, the Mamiya RB67 with its Japanese lenses produced better results. So, most of my work was using a Mamiya, but it had to be mounted on a camera and the lenses were not very fast. So, they are very well suited for studio use. So, you could shoot models, you could do products, almost every kind of studio shoot, and also you could shoot outdoors in strong light, but not as easy to handhold like the 35mm cameras that I was using, like the Nikon or the Leica M3. While I was working for the gramophone company, I was asked to supervise a shoot in Mr. Ahmed Ali's studio. Mr. Ahmed Ali was the topmost photographer in Kolkata, doing all the difficult and best industrial and advertising photography. I heard a lot about him. So, he had a large studio in Kidd Street, Palace Court, and when I entered his studio, I was really impressed. It was a much bigger studio than what my maternal uncle Mr. Dilip Shaha had, and it was really big, and the kind of equipment he was using, the lighting, I was really impressed. So, that day I spent supervising a shoot for my employer, the gramophone company. I went to supervise the shoot, and I learnt a lot just being present at the shoot. So, later on, When I felt the need for using a large format camera like this Sinar, I had not decided which camera to use, but there were a lot of models available. I met Mr. Vilas Bhende, who was one of the topmost photographers in Bombay. I went and met him in his studio, and his studio was massive. It was near the Kennedy Bridge. It was in a huge warehouse, and it was much bigger than what I had seen in Kolkata at Mr. Ahmed Ali's place. And more important, he was using the Sinar view camera. So I was interested in investing in a view camera, but I was not sure which one to buy. So once I met him and he explained to me the advantage of a Sinar view camera system over the other view camera systems, I had decided, he decided for me that yes, this is the best. And as far as my photographic equipment goes, I always believed in the best. I still do. And today the lighting equipment that I use is Broncolor, which is the world's best, and unfortunately it's also the world's most expensive. But a lot of other Chinese and Japanese equipment are also there, which are also pretty good. But then finally the decision is how much you want to invest, so that depends on the individual. So later on, when I decided to really turn full time into commercial photography, I attribute these three persons I met in my life who inspired me at various stages to take up photography as a full time profession. And I learnt that to achieve something in life, you have to think big. So later on, I built my own studio, and where I am working right now, and it was unthinkable those days why one would build such a big studio, because I decided, after having some bitter experience trying to shoot cars in all the film studios available in Calcutta, I decided to build my own studio and shoot the Hindustan Motors cars, because that's what I was doing those days, but hiring Tollygunge film studios which are not up to the mark, or you could not shoot cars always in outdoors, you needed the studio environment. So today I am here doing commercial work for the last 50 years and more, but my three persons in my life who inspired me were the three persons I mentioned: Mr. Dilip Shah, Mr. Ahmed Ali, and Mr. Vilas Bhende. Later on I met many other photographers, Mr. Sudhir Ramchandran in Bangalore, Mr. Hardev Singh in Delhi. So from each one of them I learnt a lot of little tips I picked up. So if you are keen to learn, you can learn from each and every one. So the learning goes on. Even today I am always open to learning. I can learn from even an amateur. So I am always ready to learn, and you have to keep setting your targets higher and higher and strive for excellence.